They call it a tale of innocence and cruelty. But beneath the snow-laden branches of the courtyard juniper tree lies a warning whispered across generations. A wealthy, pious couple prays every day for a child, their hearts heavy with longing and desperation. Winter presses cold and merciless against their home, frost etching the windows, and the wind carries a hollow stillness as if the world itself holds its breath. One morning, as the wife peels an apple, her knife slips. A drop of blood falls into the pure white snow, a crimson omen staining the frozen earth. The juniper tree, dark and twisted, stands in silent vigil, its branches swaying as though alive, waiting to witness what is to come. Happiness, loss, and the unseen hand of fate intermingle here, where divine justice and cruelty often walk together. Tonight, we dive into the dark and haunting tale of the juniper tree. The winter deepened, pressing its icy breath against the walls of the pious couple's home. Snow drifted in silent heaps across the courtyard where the juniper tree stood, its black branches swaying against the gray sky as though keeping watch. The wife, weakened by her own indulgence in the berries of that tree, felt a strange heaviness settle in her chest. Her breaths came shallow, each one trembling with fear that life might leave her before her deepest wish was fulfilled. "If I die," she whispered to her husband, her voice fragile as frost, "bury me beneath the juniper tree, so its shade may guide my spirit." Then, in the midst of winter's bitter grip, her prayers bore fruit. She gave birth to a boy, his skin pale as untouched snow, lips red as the first drop of blood that had fallen from her knife weeks before. Joy, pure and terrible, surged through her, and in that fleeting moment of ultimate happiness, her heart could bear no more. She died with a smile frozen on her lips, leaving her newborn in a world already heavy with sorrow. The father, grief-stricken and trembling, honored her wish. He laid her beneath the twisted branches of the juniper tree, covering her with snow and soil, the bitter scent of berries rising from the roots. Around them, the wind whispered secrets of fate, of guardianship, and of a life touched by forces beyond mortal comprehension. Even in death, the mother's presence seemed to linger, a quiet sentinel woven into the very branches above her child. Beneath that tree, the boy's destiny began, a path that would be marked by loss, cruelty, and the slow awakening of a supernatural reckoning. Time moved on in the bitter cold of the courtyard, yet warmth never truly entered the boy's life. His father, lonely and longing for companionship, remarried a woman whose smile masked cunning and cruelty. Her eyes lingered with disdain whenever the boy entered the room, and she favored her own daughter, Marlinchin, with a devotion that felt suffocating. The boy's days became a procession of small torments, whispered insults, harsh chores, and subtle neglect. Each act a reminder that he was unwanted, expendable, and vulnerable. But the stepmother's malice ran deeper than mere neglect. In the dark corners of the house, she plotted his death, a cold and calculated plan to secure wealth and inheritance for her daughter. She studied him like a predator, waiting for a moment when temptation and innocence would collide. And that moment came in the form of a chest filled with gleaming apples. Their fragrance, sweet and almost otherworldly, beckoned to the boy, and her voice, soft and coaxing, promised delight and safety. Yet beneath the gleam and the warmth of her words lurked death, a cunning trap dressed in domesticity. Outside, the juniper tree trembled in the wind, its branches dark and twisted like warning fingers. It had witnessed the boy's birth, his mother's death, and now it watched the first threads of his torment being spun. The air grew heavier with foreboding, as though the courtyard itself held its breath. Every step toward the chest was a step closer into darkness, and the boy's innocence, bright and fragile, glimmered like a candle against the encroaching shadow. Soon, the forces of cruelty and fate would collide, and the first act of horror would unfold beneath the cold, unyielding winter sky. The house, once a sanctuary of hearth and family, had become a chamber of shadows and whispered dread. The stepmother, cold and calculating, led the boy to the chest of apples, her steps silent, her intent lethal. The lid, heavy and unforgiving, became the instrument of a cruel fate. In one swift motion, she brought it down upon him, and the sound echoed through the halls like a death knell, a chilling resonance that seemed to awaken the corners of the house itself. Marlinchen, trembling and frightened, was compelled by her mother to witness the act and even assist in the aftermath, her innocence tainted by fear and obedience. Once the boy's life was stolen, the domestic horror deepened. The stepmother dismembered him with meticulous cruelty, concealing the pieces in a large pot. She cooked them into a blood-red soup, rich with the grotesque irony of nourishment turned deadly, and served it to the father with a practiced smile. Every bite he took, unaware, became a communion with the boy's shattered essence, a feast steeped in deception and the darkest domestic betrayal. Outside, the juniper tree swayed in the biting wind, its branches dark and watchful. Snow beneath its gnarled roots absorbed not only the blood and the sorrow, but also the injustice that had been done. Though the boy had been extinguished in body, the supernatural currents surrounding him stirred, restless and watchful. The tree, silent yet sentient, bore witness to the cruelty, storing the echoes of his suffering. And as the house settled into unnatural quiet, one truth remained. Death had occurred, but vengeance, born of innocence and justice, was only beginning to stir beneath the shadow of the juniper tree. Marlinchen, heart heavy with fear and grief, gathered the boy's bones beneath the gnarled roots of the juniper tree, as her mother's laughter and cruelty faded into the darkness. The snow around the tree seemed to shiver, a mist rising from the frozen earth, curling like spirits awakened by injustice. The wind carried a strange, mournful melody, as if the tree itself whispered the secrets of what had been done, its branches trembling with the weight of sorrow and vengeance. Then, from the pale haze, the impossible occurred. A small, radiant bird emerged, its feathers glimmering with a spectral light, singing a song both beautiful and terrible. Every note carried the boy's sorrow and rage, a mournful testament to his murder and a summons to justice. The townspeople heard the song and were drawn to it, unable to resist the haunting melody that seemed to pierce the winter air. The bird, small yet commanding, traveled from home to home, seeking tokens that would empower him to right the wrongs inflicted. He requested a gold chain, a pair of red shoes, and finally, a millstone. Each gift symbolic, each a measure of the power he required to restore balance. Every step he took was guided by the unseen currents of fate and the lingering presence of the juniper tree, which watched over him as both guardian and witness. Suspense hung thick in the air, as though the world itself waited for the reckoning to come. The boy, transformed, was no longer merely a victim. He had become the instrument of divine justice. His song, haunting and unyielding, promised that cruelty and wickedness could never remain unpunished, and that the innocent, even in death, could rise to claim their due. The bird returned home, its feathers glinting like frost in the pale winter sun, carrying with it the weight of vengeance and the echoes of innocence lost. It alighted on the juniper tree, where the father watched in awe, unaware of the journey that had unfolded in shadows and mist. One by one, the bird presented the gifts it had claimed. The gold chain, shining with a spectral light. A pair of red shoes imbued with the memory of pain and perseverance. And finally, the millstone, heavy with the promise of justice. The stepmother, sensing the gathering storm, appeared in the courtyard, her eyes wide with terror as the air around her seemed to pulse with the weight of supernatural retribution. The wind howled through the branches of the juniper tree, carrying the bird's mournful song and the echoes of the boy's suffering. Flames of karmic fury seemed to rise from the snow itself, and in one decisive motion, the millstone fell. The stepmother's cries were swallowed by the winter wind, and she was gone, consumed by the consequences of her cruelty. With the stepmother's death, a transformation occurred. The bird's form shimmered, bones and feathers coesculated, until the boy stood once more, flesh and blood restored, eyes bright with life and the quiet wisdom of his trials. Father and sister rushed to embrace him, the courtyard finally warm with the reunion of family and the relief of justice fulfilled. Beneath the juniper tree, shadows receded, but the air remained heavy with the memory and the lingering presence of fate. The boy had survived, innocence restored, and the cruel punished. The story concluded, but its echoes endured, a reminder that even the harshest winters, justice, courage, and the supernatural will not be denied. The tale of the juniper tree is more than a story of loss and cruelty. It is a journey through darkness, innocence betrayed, and the relentless hand of justice. Within the frozen courtyard, a boy's life was stolen, a mother's love lingered beyond the grave, and a stepmother's malice was laid bare. Blood fell upon the snow, apples became instruments of temptation, and a humble juniper tree stood as silent witness to every act of wickedness and every spark of courage. Through death and transformation, the boy returned, not merely to live, but to restore balance and deliver retribution. The bird's song, haunting and ethereal, reminded the world that injustice, no matter how hidden, cannot remain unpunished. If you enjoyed this dark fairy tale, be sure to like, subscribe, and share with someone who appreciates the chilling and the mystical. And as always, don't forget to look beyond the fog.